Welcome to Discovering the Northwoods from the Manitowish Waters Historical Society. We will take you on a journey through our local history with the help of primary source documentation. To learn more about this rich history or about the Historical Society, check out our website at mwhistory.org for blog posts, show notes, our YouTube channel, and a full transcription of this episode. As with many historical works from this era, there are phrases, terms, and descriptions that are inappropriate to our modern sensibilities. The Manitowish Waters Historical Society in no way condones these offensive remarks or passages. We would like to introduce two articles titled The Great Northwoods, written by E.W.H in 1904. This episode is read by me, Brenna Riley. Part 1, The Atchison Daily Globe. Atchison, Kansas, August 29, 1904. In northern Wisconsin and the upper peninsula of Michigan, there is a tract of wild land known as the Great Northwoods. It is nearly 100 miles square and covered with lakes and woods. It is said that in the district there are thousands of lakes. Some of them are nearly 12 miles long, like Lake Gogebic, while some are small and known as potholes. Nearly all of them are connected on one side of what is known as the Divide. The waters flow into Lake Superior. On the other side, the waters flow into the Mississippi. On the Lake Superior side, only bass and perch are found in the lakes. On the Mississippi side, muskellunge and pike abound. The district is a special hobby of the Chicago and Northwestern Railway and is extensively advertised by this big corporation. The Northwestern runs several lines through the district, and a letter to the passenger department of the road at Chicago will bring you maps and handsomely printed books telling you all about the greatest hunting and fishing resort in the United States. I lately visited the Great Northwoods. I spent 2 weeks in visiting its lakes. I left Chicago on the Northwestern train at 5 p.m. and traveled all that night and until 8 o'clock the next morning when I arrived at Manitowish, Wisconsin, a little town of half a dozen houses, but headquarters for several of the resorts in that section. There are 2 hotels at Manitowish, the proprietors of which also supplied guides and vehicles. One of these hotel men captured me, and within a half hour, I started for Crab Lake, my destination. Crab Lake is 23 miles from Manitowish, and here is the way I got there. I rode 6 miles in a spring wagon, following the Manitowish River, famous in logging history. At the end of the trip, I arrived at a place known as the Dam on Rest Lake. Here, a dam has been built by lumbermen at a place where Rest Lake becomes the Manitowish River. By means of this dam, the stage of water is raised or lowered for handling logs. From the dam, I was carried by a gasoline launch for 6 or 7 miles, through several lakes and rivers, a delightful trip. Arriving on the eastern shore of Clear Lake, a guide met me, and we made a portage of a mile. That is, we walked. At the end of the portage, we came to Big Lake, where the guide had a boat. Crossing Big Lake in a boat, we entered Rice Creek, so called because wild rice grows in its marshes, an indigenous camp in the vicinity to gather it. Rice Creek is 3 miles long and very wild and picturesque. At one place, rapids compelled me to walk a short distance, and the guide took the water and pushed the boat ahead of him. At the eastern end of Rice Creek, we entered Round Lake. After crossing Round Lake, another portage of a mile, the guide carried the boat and I carried my valise. This portage represents the divide referred to above. Round Lake is famous for muskellunge and pike, whereas in Crab Lake, on the other side of the divide, only bass and perch are found. At the end of this portage, we came to Little Crab Lake. Crossing that and making another portage, we entered Lower Crab Lake, and from that point, there was plain rowing to Kay's Island, where I was to be a guest. Kay's Island is owned by Dean Kay of Topeka. It is about 3 acres in extent and occupied by a house of 8 rooms. This house is built of pine logs with large porches. Nearly all the chairs, tables, and beds in the house are made of small pine trees, and the effect is very pleasing. The house is completely furnished and during the winter is in charge of a watchman who also looks after other houses in the vicinity and gets a supply of firewood, for fire is necessary in the Great Northwoods every night of the summer. While I was there, the thermostat never registered higher than 76 degrees, and one morning it was as low as 47. In winter, we are supposed to heat our homes to the temperature of 72. Melons and tomatoes will not ripen in that country, owing to the chilly summer weather and the short season. Dean Kay did not visit his island this summer, and Frank P. McLennan of the Topeka State Journal rented it. He took his entire family there, over the route I have described. 3 guides assisted him, and they made the journey in 9 hours. His family consisted of himself and his wife, a daughter 13 years old, his sister-in-law, his mother, and his mother-in-law. His mother is 76 years old, and she walked across the portages without trouble. Their supplies and heavy baggage had been shipped in several days before their arrival by way of Marinesco, Michigan. A wagon road runs from Marinesco to Crab Lake, and a man makes the trip to the lake every time he can get $10 for it. The road is very rough, and a big lumber wagon is used. The distance is 20 miles. All the horses used in that country are very large, as they are used in the winter in the lumber camps. The reader will understand, no doubt, that the pioneers in that country were lumbermen. Much of the land has been cut over, and new growth is springing up. The timber comprises of spruce, white pine, Norway pine, hemlock, cedar, birch, tamarack, and balsam. Last September, a tornado swept through that country for a distance of 50 miles and never touched a single house. The tornado crossed the road to Marinesco, and it cost $600 to clear out the twisted trees for a distance of 2 miles, which was about the average breadth of the storm. I was to be a guest of the McLennans, and the guide who met me at Big Lake was their employee. There are 6 cottages on Crab Lake occupied only in the summer. The first one I saw was that of the Ohio Club, which is a quite impressive looking building with several cottages surrounding it. The Ohio Club is composed of a dozen citizens of Columbus, Ohio, who visit Crab Lake in 2s or 3s or when they can get away. The Ohio Club is the post office for the other cottages. A freight from Marinesco is delivered there. The next island was occupied by Dr. Whitesides, the next by Herman E. Dick, the next by a man named Myers, and the next Dr. Burt, and the next was Kay's Island, which I looked upon with interest. I spent 2 weeks at Kay's Island receiving as warm a welcome as any man ever received anywhere. I was given the guest chamber, the best room in the house, but discovered the first night that my host snored so loudly that sleeping was impossible. The partitions of the cottage are made of pine logs standing upright, with moss stuffed between the cracks. As a result, Mr. McLennan's snoring was distinctively audible all over the house. But members of his family were so loyal to him that they said they couldn't hear it. I tried it a second night and then deserted the guest chamber for a cot in the guide's tent, which had been erected by the lake shore. Ferdinand the guide had lived in that country all his life and is an interesting character. In winter, he works in the lumber camps. In summer, he acts as a guide, receiving $2.50 a day and board. He had many interesting experiences to relate to and did not snore. Ferdinand's daughter, Isabella, helped Mrs. McLennan and the women folks in the kitchen. We had surprisingly good meals, but no milk and no fresh fruits or vegetables. Instead, we had condensed milk and canned vegetables and fruits. Some of the cottagers who go up there every year take chickens and cows with them. We had good butter, and for meat, we had fish, ham, and bacon and corned beef hash. There are blueberries and red raspberries on some of the islands, and we had plenty of these when we took the trouble to pick them. Blueberry cake, raspberry shortcake, blueberry pie. We also found cranberries and plenty of wild cherries, out of which we made jam and cordial. There are a lot of things about the life in the Great Northwoods that seem interesting to me. By tomorrow, I hope to recover from a condensed milk busthead and will attempt them. E.W.H. Part 4, The Atchison Daily Globe. Atchison, Kansas, August 31st, 1904. I should say this would be an ideal way to visit the Great Northwoods. Hire a guide and make a trip in a canoe. An outfit of a tent, cooking utensils, and provisions can be easily procured. Then you can go where you please. When night overtakes you, the guide will put up your tent and cook supper. When you run out of supplies, the guide can procure a fresh supply in a day's time. In this way, you could see hundreds of lakes, and that is the real joy of the trip. In this way, you may enter the woods at Manitowish, Wisconsin, and leave them at Cisco Lake in Michigan, to which point the Chicago Northwestern has a branch line. The distance as the crows fly would be something like 40 miles, but you would travel through hundreds of lakes and portages in making that distance. Whenever overtaken by night, you would be at home. Two persons could go together in this way, with one guide and one canoe. The best fishing in the district would be found, and pheasants and deer would be encountered. If the guide saw fit to shoot a deer for fresh meat, of course, you couldn't help it. There are places where you get board and room at $10 a week. Such a place is operated at Spider Lake by George W. Buck. Mr. Buck owns a gasoline launch which carries passengers from Clear Lake to the dam for 50 cents. He can supply such an outfit as I have outlined for a trip through the lakes. There is a post office at his place, but it is closed after fishing and hunting season. If you care to write Mr. Buck, here is his address. George W. Buck, Spider Lake, Wisconsin. By the way, the guides and lumbermen refer to Wisconsin as Wisconsin. They will know you are a tenderfoot if you refer to the state as Wisconsin. Ferdinand and Charlie, the guides, used to tell me a good deal about the rivers up there, known as the Grandmother. Near it is a rapids, or something of the kind known as the Grandfather. There are two hotels at Manitowish, one operated by a man of the name Johnson, and the other by a man named Stone. Either of these men can supply guides, transportation, and everything else needed. Both of them complained to me about various resorts. It seems that bad roads are not confined to any particular section. At Case Island on rainy days, and days when we did not care to go out fishing, we had a good deal of idle time on our hands. Ferdinand the guide was usually up first, and we could hear him splitting wood and starting the fire. Then he would go down to the lake after a bucket of water. Then Isabella, his daughter, would clatter down the stairs and put on the oatmeal. One by one, the members of the family would appear. But the day was not in full swing until Mrs. McLennan appeared and decided what we were to have for breakfast. The kitchen was quite large and looked like a grocery store with its supplies on the shelves. You have no doubt wondered what is done with all the canned goods. You will find out if you go to the Great Northwoods. And they are surprisingly good. I did not try drinking condensed milk, but in coffee or on oatmeal. It is as good as the real thing. A man used to can apples in Atchison, and I wondered what he did with them. I found out on the trip to Crab Lake that canned apples are excellent. The only objection to the place I could find was that they had too much to eat. I cannot remember everything, but I do remember being surprised every day that they could have so much so far away from the market. Of course, we had fish every day, usually 3 times a day. Although I'm accustomed at home to 2 meals a day, they had 3 full meals every day at Kay's cottage, and usually 5 o'clock tea. After breakfast on rainy mornings, the women folks would sit around and make balsam pillows, Ferdinand having been sent to the mainland for balsam fir. I used to make a list of the friends they intended sending the pillows to, and found that the lists were frequently changed. A member of the McLennan party was Miss Carrie Goddard, a principal of a Topeka ward school. She is a good cook. What do you think of that? A school teacher was able to cook such a marvel. To me, I used to sit in the kitchen and watch her get breakfast. Miss Goddard, although she had a severe way about her that school teaching and glasses bring, has the greatest respect for her brother in law, which is another remarkable thing to me. The school teachers I know, particularly the principals, do not either fear or respect the men. The men fear them. I have never known any man who receives so much attention and veneration from the women of his household as does Mr. McLennan. His mother, who is 76 years old, was always hovering about him in a way that made you think a good deal of her. His mother in law also admires him. She told me one day that Mr. McLennan did not snore at home, and that his snoring at the cottage, which has driven me to the tent with Ferdinand, was due to the fact that he had fallen while carrying a boat and sprained his ankle. The amount of attention he receives because of that ankle is enormous. While with me in the woods, he would walk as good as anyone, but as soon as we landed on the dock at Kay's Island, he began limping. He seemed to greatly enjoy the notoriety that ankle gave him with his wife, his daughter, his mother, and his mother in law. Every night they would bathe it in hot water and then rub it oh so carefully for fear of hurting it with arnica and salve and Pond's extract to take out the inflammation. Although Ferdinand and I used to say there was no inflammation. As explaining why Mr. McLennan is so greatly admired by his womenfolk, it's probably no more than fair for me to express my own opinion that he is the nicest man in his family I ever knew. I was expressing my admiration for him one day to his mother, and she said, "Still, he always gets his way." It is a good idea to be patient and thoughtful and then always have your own way. One day, I took his mother and mother in law out rowing, landing at one of the portages. We walked across the lake they had never seen, in which was quite an adventure for them. Usually, elderly people are impatient and poor company generally. But you should see these two. They made me ashamed of myself because I often think what a crank I'll be, unreasonable, and that there will be a considerable dissatisfaction because I hang on so long. The most popular members of the party at Kay's cottage were the two grandmothers. Some of these days, they're coming to Atchison to look at the new Globe office. You will be in luck if you find the opportunity to see them. The McLennans have been in the woods for 6 or 7 weeks and will leave for home tomorrow morning. When they reach Manitowish, they ought to find awaiting them lots of cantaloupes, green corn, cucumbers, tomatoes, peaches, pears, plums, chocolate, etc. Anyway, I have bought a box of things in Chicago on my way home and paid to express to Manitowish, where the McLennans will take supper tomorrow evening. One rainy day, we tried to impress Isabella, the daughter of Ferdinand, with the immensity of the outside world. Isabella is 14 years old and has always lived in Manitowish. which was the population of about 40. She has heard, however, that Wausau, Wisconsin is a big town. We tried to tell Isabella about the ocean. She was familiar with water, but never seen a body of water more than 3 or 4 miles long. Think of a lake, we said to her, as long as from here to Manitowish. Isabella thought of it and was greatly impressed. The distance of Kay's Island to Manitowish is 23 miles. But she had heard of a game known as King William. She said a bold boy came to Manitowish once from Wausau and introduced it at school, and that she played it, whereupon we all said, "Why, Isabella?" We pretended that we had never done such a thing in our all-born days. And Isabella blushed because she had been led into it by a bold boy from Wausau. When I went away, we all came down to the dock to see me start, and Isabella gave me her address as I had requested her to do it. It read Isabella, Manitowish, Wisconsin, write soon. Possibly we did not entertain each other very well at Kay's cottages. Anyway, I have seen 5 persons seated at one table playing solitaire at one time. There was very little gossip in our neighborhood, except when we invented it. I invented some one day on Mrs. Burt. You all know what a nice woman we think Mrs. Burt is, I said. Well, I'll sit a little closer and I'll tell you something. I was over on her island the other day, and she was showing me through the house. You know the old story of a mother telling her child when she punishes it that she does it for the child's good and the punishment hurts the mother worse than it does the child? Well, that's the way Mrs. Burt punishes her little daughter Frances. And do you know? The child believes it. Frances actually cries when she's punished because of the suffering of her mother. As I have said on some trips, we took both guides with us. It is amusing to see 2 guides together. And when Ferdinand was alone with us, he would make all sorts of statements, and we could not contradict him because we knew nothing of the facts. If we asked about a berry, tree, shrub, or animal, he would promptly invent an answer. But if Big Charlie were along and we asked Ferdinand the distance to Presque Isle Lake, and Ferdinand said 12 miles, Big Charlie would say, "What's that? 12 miles?" And then Big Charlie would look in a peculiar way which indicates that the ignorance of some people is surprising, whereupon a jawing match would arise, and we would add as much fuel as possible to the flames. So it would go on all day. Whatever Big Charlie said, Ferdinand would deny. Whatever Ferdinand said, Big Charlie would deny. On my return home, there was a very heavy wind on Big Lake, and the 2 guides were discussing the best way to cross it in a rowboat. Big Charlie argued in favor of one side and Ferdinand in favor of the other, but finally Ferdinand won. On reaching the shore, Ferdinand had recommended, "We've really found that the water was much quieter," and Ferdinand said to me softly, "Had we gone to the other side, we would have gone to the bottom." At Big Lake, I may say incidentally, a man of Laughlin, a rich powder manufacturer, has a place where he often entertains 20 friends at a high time. That's about all the rich man gets out of it, the privilege of entertaining more. At Big Lake, also, there is a club known as the Manitowish, where a number of gentlemen own cottages and dine in a common dining room. But these people are in comparative civilization. They're only one portage removed from an electric launch, fresh meats and milk, and fruits and vegetables. One night we had a real excitement at the cottage. Our neighbor, Mr. Dick, came over and said one of his guides had been lost. He feared that he attempted to cross the lake in spite of the rough winds and had been drowned. He wanted to borrow Big Charlie to go in search of the missing man. Big Charlie was in bed in the tent and dressed hurriedly and departed in a boat. Before going many miles, he had found the man returning home. He had simply laid up until the storm subsided. On the trip across Big Lake, Big Charlie told of a peculiar character found in lumber and hunting camps known as the jumper. A jumper is a very nervous man, and when you approach suddenly and loudly say, "Look out!" He jumps at a great distance and acts in a very excited manner. Meet a jumper in the woods and say hello to him when he's not looking and does not know anyone is near him, and like as not, he will turn quickly and shoot you. It is quite a story, as Big Charlie told it, but Ferdinand informed me privately there was nothing in it. The guides have an expression you seldom hear. A place where you can get a boat through and going from one lake to another is known as a thoroughfare. If it is necessary to portage the boat, there is no thoroughfare between two lakes. This made me think of the Dickinson novel, No Thoroughfare. When I first read the book, I had never heard of the expression. When the guides carry a boat, he usually has a pack saddle, a padded affair fitting over his neck and adjusting itself to the boat as it is turned upside down. He is also supplied with pack straps and packing bags, articles which seem weird to a man from the prairie country. On a certain Friday night, I parted with Ferdinand at Clear Lake and with Big Charlie at the dam. On parting, both said the same thing. Well, take care of yourself. I wish I could. After a ride of 6 miles, a telegraph pole began to appear, and then I heard a tinkle of a cowbell. Soon after, the wife of the hotel proprietor was surprised at the actions of a man who made out a pretty good meal on milk and bread. E.W.H.